It was the end of 1996 in a new subdivision in an area called Pinnacle Peak, just north of Phoenix, Arizona. Our home was pretty much developed right on the edge of the fresh desert with stunning rocky peaks nearby. The desert was actually federal land, and at that time people weren't really supposed to venture there. But I was a teenager in my junior year of high school, and I loved riding my bike around there looking for scorpions. Soon, I made a new friend who lived about 2 miles away on the other side of the desert. We often went to a particular spot where there was a small nook on the side of the peak. It was a cool place where we loved to hang out. Now, I realize how scary it was to be there with rattlesnakes, scorpions, and cacti that stuck to you like hooks. Once we ran into a couple of guys driving an old truck who stopped right in front of my bike, blocking their way. They threatened to run over my bike and us if we didn't move it. My friend moved it. I didn't say anything and just moved it out of the way. But yes, it was quite a dangerous place. My friend and I would roll huge rocks from the top of the peak, watching them tumble down and crush everything below. It was fun to watch, though at the time we didn't think about the danger. I would shoot small stones with my slingshot at other rocks, and pretty much anything around us. Later on, that friend of mine moved to Florida and would occasionally come back, but I usually went there alone. One day I picked up some jumping cacti to plant one in my garden because we had some crazy neighbors who were fighting with the homeowners association over their solar panels on the roof. This guy and his kids would graffiti the fences and act violently towards the neighbors. So I thought I'd plant these nasty cacti under the fence, and if they crossed over, they'd be in for a prickly surprise. Anyway, while I was collecting the cacti, an unmarked black helicopter suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Something in my mind told me to get out of there immediately, so I jumped on my bike and rode as fast as I could back home, even though it was over 2 miles away. Eventually, I got home and ran to the pool, plunging my head in because I was about to have a heat stroke. Moments later, that same helicopter was hovering right above our backyard. I didn't look up even once. I stayed calm and petted my dog. After a minute or two, it left, but it was really strange. I should add that behind the area where I was, there was a shooting range from Luke Air Force Base, but here's where the real story begins. Soon after this, I started experiencing really strange things while I slept. I'm talking about suddenly waking up and finding myself violently hitting my pillow against something without knowing why. It happened many times, and often I noticed a blurry, ghostly face or figure that disappeared as soon as I realized something was there. Later, I graduated and started a graphic design school in Tempe, Arizona. I drove from my parents' house to school very early in the morning, and once there, I'd sleep a couple of hours in the car before school started. One day, I woke up and saw a figure next to my window. I got scared and was completely awake, but my eyes closed again and I couldn't open them. I had a knife in the door, so I tried to grab it, but I couldn't move at all. Moments later, I finally managed to free myself, but I couldn't understand how it had happened. Years passed and I moved back to Washington State where I grew up, and my parents had also moved there while I was in school. Later, I met a woman, and we got married in 2001. I continued having the same experiences with ghostly apparitions every few months, and even a couple of times my wife had witnessed the same things. We had fascinating conversations about my sleep. She often saw me sitting up in bed with my eyes wide open, speaking in some ancient-sounding language. Usually she'd nudge me and tell me to go back to bed, and apparently, I would obey. We laughed it off, thinking it was just harmless sleepwalking. By 2004, we moved to Texas. At the end of 2003, we rented a small cedar cabin in Smithville, Texas. My wife worked for the airlines and wouldn't get home until midnight or 3 a.m. Well, one night in June 2004, everything was about to change forever. I finished my work and got home around 9:00 p.m. I was relaxing and listening to music. I fell asleep around 11:30 p.m., and my wife got home around 2:30 a.m. after I'd gone to bed. I have no memory of the events until I regained consciousness, which I will describe later in the incident. The following is from the perspective of my ex-wife. She describes that upon arriving at the cabin, she heard what seemed like dogs running around our cabin and growling, which scared her, and she quickly went inside. Once inside, she could hear more growling coming from our dark bedroom. She went to investigate, somewhat forgetting about the dog growls outside. She saw me standing on the bed in an inhuman, contorted way with my mouth hanging open and dark eyes. The room was very dark, but initially she didn't think much of it and thought I was just sleepwalking. She thought she could nudge me again, and I would simply lie back down as usual. She was very, very wrong. As she approached, she says I lunged at her like a predator and began to strangle her neck. She describes that she didn't even want to look at me, fearing that something truly evil and exceptionally malevolent had taken control of my body. She was so afraid for her life that she kicked me to push me away, but it didn't work. Even though she kept kicking, during this incident she was screaming for her life, calling my name and asking for help. Somehow, I finally managed to free myself from whatever was controlling me. It felt like my soul was being held captive, and I slowly regained control over the fading power that this thing had. I could hear the most horrible, gut-wrenching demonic screech that I had ever heard. I couldn't mimic it no matter how hard I tried. When I finally realized something awful was happening, I tried to tell her everything was okay now. But when I spoke, my voice wasn't my own. If you've ever seen the movie, The Mothman Prophecies, where Indrid Cold is on the phone talking with that low, creepy voice, that's how I sounded. And I remember her saying, "No, it's not okay, Hugh." A few minutes passed and I was completely free from what had just happened. Back to normal. Needless to say, I was absolutely terrified. We both were. We were both crying and knew that something had attacked us, something that wasn't just a dream or night terror. Somehow the bathroom door closed on its own during the incident, and my cat, Zebre, was running in circles, scared. Also, this cat loved me to death, and had never been afraid of me until that night. All my strange experiences seemed to culminate in that cabin. My wife and I couldn't sleep that night. I had to work in the morning, and she went to church to get holy water, which she sprinkled around the cabin. We both prayed, although at that time I thought the idea of God and prayer was ridiculous. When I woke up in the morning and went outside, the air was chilly, and I could feel the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I felt like something was outside watching me, and it was angry. About 2 weeks later, I was home alone and suddenly woke up to see a statue of Apollo that we had bought at Walmart, except now its eyes were glowing blue. I thought it was the moonlight reflecting in them, so I grabbed it and took it into the dark. To my horror, the eyes still glowed. I refused to give in to fear and put it on the floor, covering it with a blanket, then went back to bed. After that, I never again experienced ghostly clouds over me, or sleep talking with my eyes open. Absolutely nothing. The only thing that remained after 2004 was that my relationship with my wife slowly crumbled. We had 2 children, and in 2010 we divorced. Now in my home, I hear knocks in the kitchen and sometimes in the hallways, but I don't feel threatened. I met with some paranormal experts in 2008 who believed it was possible that I had attracted a skinwalker in the Arizona desert due to my destructive or intrusive teenage nature, and that it had been following me all those years. All I know is that I'm not a Bible thumper and never will be, but there's nothing wrong with just believing in God and asking for help when needed. Keep in mind that negative energy feeds on fear. I've never drunk or used drugs of any kind, and before this I never had sleep issues. You could tell me I had night terrors, but I personally know it was much, much more than that. Sometimes you just have to have your own experience to know there's much more to our world than what meets the eye.